Here we go again. They can't stop. I keep telling y'all, they cannot stop. A'ja Wilson wins Time Athlete of the Year. And rather than talking about herself, what does she want to do? She wants to down Caitlin Clark. She wants to downplay the impact and disrespect CC and the fans. And it just never...
The arena was still roaring when everything snapped. One possession, one glare, one heated exchange that cameras barely caught, but microphones did. Caitlin Clark and A'ja Wilson, two faces of the league, locked eyes with attention so sharp it sliced through the noise. What happened next didn't just spark a moment. It ignited a firestorm that the WNBA was completely unprepared for. Within minutes, clips were slowed, zoomed, dissected. Lip readers went wild. Commentators rushed to frame the narrative before the facts even settled. And somehow, impossibly, the league's response made everything worse. Subtle jabs, careless phrasing, a tone that felt dismissive, tilted, and dangerously one-sided. Fans felt it instantly. Something was off. Caitlin Clark didn't shout. She didn't shove. She stood her ground. And that was enough to trigger backlash that felt wildly disproportionate. Social media turned into a battlefield. Accusations flew. Allegiances hardened. And quietly, brutally, the league's handling of the moment began to look less like leadership and more like panic. A'ja Wilson walked away composed, but the exchange followed her like a shadow. Caitlin Clark walked into a media storm that seemed determined to humble her. And the WNBA? It hesitated. It misread the room. It underestimated the fan base. And in doing so, it sparked something far bigger than a sideline argument. Because what should have been a moment of competition turned into a referendum on respect, bias, and control. And as outrage surged and regret set in behind closed doors, one terrifying question started echoing everywhere. What did the league just unleash by choosing the wrong side at the worst possible moment? Long before that exchange ever crackled through the arena, the tension had been quietly building, layered, emotional, and soaked in history the league never fully confronted. Caitlin Clark didn't arrive in the WNBA as just another rookie. She arrived as a disruption. From the moment she stepped onto the floor, everything accelerated: ratings, attention, expectations. And with that acceleration came pressure that no onboarding meeting could prepare her for. Every shot she took carried weight beyond the scoreboard. Every foul she drew was reinterpreted as favoritism. Every no-call sparked accusations. Caitlin felt it immediately. The sense that she was being watched differently, evaluated not just as a player, but as a symbol others were already fighting over. Praise came loud, but so did resentment, whispered first, then bolder. A'ja Wilson's story ran on a different track, built on years of dominance, earned respect, and leadership forged through battles that didn't need hype to validate them. She was the standard, the anchor, the one who carried the league when attention was thinner and spotlight scarcer. To many veterans, that history mattered deeply. And as Clark's rise drew attention at a speed that felt unfair to those who had paid dues in quieter eras, unease crept in. It wasn't personal at first. It was structural. Locker rooms talked. Players noticed which highlights looped endlessly, which quotes got traction, which jerseys sold out overnight. For some, Caitlin represented progress. For others, she represented a mirror, reflecting how much they'd given without ever receiving the same amplification. The league didn't help. Instead of contextualizing growth, it leaned into momentum. Marketing accelerated faster than culture could adjust. Narratives simplified rivalries instead of honoring complexity. And the unspoken message felt clear to many players. Attention follows dollars, not history. Caitlin felt that backlash in small moments that added up fast. Hard fouls that lingered a beat too long. Smirks after whistles. Conversations that stopped when she entered the room. She didn't complain publicly. She didn't demand protection. She tried to play through it, but playing through pressure doesn't make it disappear. It compresses it. Meanwhile, A'ja carried her own weight. The expectation to remain composed, to represent stability, to absorb comparisons she never asked for. Being framed as the other side of a manufactured rivalry hardened things. Every mention of Clark felt like an unspoken measurement against A'ja's legacy. That wears on anyone. By the time their paths collided in that now infamous moment, the exchange wasn't just two competitors barking. It was everything unsaid finally leaking out. The problem wasn't that emotions flared. The problem was what came next. Instead of acknowledging context, The league's reaction felt rushed, sanitized, and tilted. Language choices mattered, and fans noticed. Clark's frustration was framed as excess. Wilson's intensity was framed as leadership. The imbalance didn't need to be stated outright to be felt. Online, the response exploded. Some accused Clark of disrespect. Others accused the league of hypocrisy. Old debates resurfaced instantly, about race, about marketability, about who gets grace and who gets scrutinized. And suddenly, a single exchange had become a fault line exposing everything the league had avoided addressing for years. Caitlin retreated inward, processing the realization that excellence alone wouldn't protect her. Aya, outwardly calm, absorbed the swirl knowing her words would be weighed differently no matter what she said. And behind closed doors, league officials began realizing, too late, that they hadn't just mishandled a moment. They had reopened wounds. Because this wasn't about one argument. It was about a system straining under growth it wasn't emotionally prepared to manage. And as the pressure mounted, the silence between the league and its players grew heavier, setting the stage for a confrontation that would no longer stay contained on the court. What should have been a cooling presence landed like gasoline. Carefully worded statements hit feeds, but fans read between every line. The phrasing felt clinical, detached, worse, selective. The exchange between Caitlin Clark and Aya Wilson was framed as competitive intensity. Yet the undertone tilted perception in a way people couldn't ignore. One side sounded contained. The other sounded cautioned. And that imbalance ripped the wound open. Caitlin felt it instantly. She saw the posts before practice. Screens lighting up. Commentators already dissecting her tone, her posture, her attitude. Clips looped endlessly, slowed down until emotion looked like intent. Her name trended with words she'd never attached to herself. Disrespectful. Entitled. Uncontrolled. It was like watching a version of herself she didn't recognize being built in real time. Inside the gym, the air was different. Teammates were supportive but careful. Conversations softened. Jokes didn't land the same. Everyone knew she was under a microscope now, and that awareness changed how people moved around her. Caitlin locked in harder, shots snapping through the net with extra force. Each release carrying frustration she refused to verbalize. Across the league, reactions fractured instantly. Some players spoke up, defending competition, reminding fans that intensity had always been part of the game. Others were quieter, choosing not to add fuel. A few comments, vague but pointed, floated through social media, hinting that respect had to be earned differently depending on who you were. The subtext did more damage than any direct accusation ever could. Then the first shocking twist surfaced. An internal league memo leaked, not explosive in content, but devastating in implication. It emphasized image responsibility and brand alignment following recent on-court interactions. The timing made it impossible to ignore. Fans read it as a message aimed squarely at Caitlin, whether intended or not. The backlash was instant and merciless. "This isn't about basketball anymore," one viral post read. "This is about control." The league scrambled to clarify. Spokespeople insisted the memo was routine, generalized, unrelated. But intent mattered less than impact now, and the impact was catastrophic. The narrative hardened overnight. The league had chosen optics over fairness, restraint over context. Caitlin's camp noticed something else. Media access subtly shifted. Interview requests multiplied but narrowed in scope. Questions grew sharper, less about performance and more about demeanor. Her every response was framed as either defiant or evasive. There was no neutral lane left. Silence looked guilty. Honesty looked risky. She chose silence. That choice infuriated critics and empowered supporters. Fans flooded timelines with side-by-side clips of past confrontations involving other stars. Moments celebrated as passion, leadership, fire. The comparisons were brutal. The implication was clear. The rules weren't consistent. Aya Wilson found herself dragged into a storm she never asked for. Despite her composure, despite refusing to escalate publicly, her name became inseparable from the controversy. Some fans tried to pit her against Caitlin explicitly, framing the exchange as a referendum on legacy versus hype. Others pushed back, insisting this wasn't about choosing sides, but about accountability from the league. Aya stayed professional. But even professionalism has weight. Behind the scenes, frustration simmered. She'd spent years carrying expectations without complaint, and now she was being used as an anchor in a narrative she didn't control. Every word she didn't say became a projection screen for others' arguments. The second wave hit harder. A prominent analyst went on air and suggested Caitlin needed to be checked, framing the moment as a necessary lesson. The phrasing lit a fuse. Clips went viral within minutes. Fans dissected tone, history, bias. Sponsors noticed. The league noticed. Caitlin watched the segment alone. Not angry, stunned. Because she realized something terrifying in that moment. The criticism wasn't about what she did. It was about what she represented. Growth, change, disruption. And disruption scares systems that thrive on predictability. That realization shifted everything. Her approach changed. Not louder, sharper. Practices became methodical. Game nights surgical. She didn't force shots. She dismantled defenses patiently, methodically, as if proving a point without ever stating it. And every performance only intensified the conversation the league was desperate to quiet. Ratings spiked again. That irony wasn't lost on anyone. League leadership faced pressure from all directions. Fans demanded clarification. Players demanded consistency. Media demanded access. Sponsors demanded stability. And internally, the question no one wanted to ask out loud loomed large. Had they miscalculated the moment? Another twist emerged late one night. A report claimed that a scheduled meeting between Caitlin's camp and league representatives had been postponed indefinitely. No explanation. No reschedule. Just paused. The timing raised eyebrows. Was it strategic? Was it defiance? Or was it the league pulling back after realizing it no longer controlled the narrative? Speculation ran wild. Some insiders claimed Caitlin had refused to engage until the league addressed the perception of bias directly. Others suggested the league feared making things worse by saying the wrong thing again. The uncertainty only amplified tension. Meanwhile, locker rooms buzzed. Players debated openly now. Some felt inspired by Caitlin's refusal to bend. Others worried the spotlight was becoming destabilizing. Coaches urged focus, but knew the distraction was unavoidable. Every game felt heavier, charged with meaning far beyond the scoreboard. Then came the moment that changed the temperature entirely. During a nationally televised game, Caitlin took a hard hit, legal but aggressive. She popped up immediately. No complaint. No stare. Just calm. The crowd erupted anyway. The moment symbolized everything fans were arguing about. Toughness, restraint, expectation. Commentators tread carefully. The league's official accounts stayed quiet. And that silence spoke volumes. Because by now, everyone understood the truth. The league hadn't just misjudged a single exchange. It had underestimated how closely fans were watching, how deeply they cared, and how quickly trust could fracture when responses felt uneven. Caitlin walked off the court that night without addressing the media. Again, and as the noise reached a deafening pitch, one final detail began circulating among insiders. A rumor so destabilizing it made everything before it feel like prelude. Caitlin Clark, they whispered, was done waiting to be explained. She was preparing to explain herself, on her terms. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be a clarification. It would be a reckoning. The escalation hit like a chain reaction no one could stop once it started. What had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over in ways the league could no longer manage with statements or silence. The moment Caitlin Clark walked back onto the floor after that hard hit, calm and unflinching, something shifted in the crowd, and then everywhere else. The chants weren't rehearsed. They were emotional, raw, polarizing. Half the arena roared her name with defiance. The other half bristled with tension that felt personal. Cameras caught Aya Wilson watching from the sideline, jaw tight, expression unreadable. Not angry, not dismissive, just aware that the situation had outgrown the two of them. Social media detonated again, but this time it wasn't just fans arguing. Former players entered the fray with clashing perspectives that refused to align. Some praised Caitlin's composure as elite mental toughness. Others framed it as provocation, intentional or not. Every post felt like a spark. Every reply poured fuel. Behind the scenes, league politics turned ugly. An emergency call was reportedly held. Not about discipline, not about fines, but about messaging. Executives debated tone, timing, responsibility. Some argued the league needed to acknowledge the inconsistency fans were pointing out. Others insisted doing so would validate criticism they couldn't afford to admit. The room split sharply, and for the first time, the unity leadership depended on cracked under pressure. Then the second major twist landed. A respected journalist dropped a report late at night that changed the stakes entirely. According to multiple sources, the league had internally discussed issuing a clarification, not about the exchange itself, but about how it was framed publicly. The clarification never came. Why? Because several players pushed back hard, warning that it would look like backpedaling under fan pressure. That detail exploded. Now, the story wasn't just about Caitlin Clark versus perception. It was about players influencing league narrative behind closed doors. Fans saw it as proof the system was more political than transparent. Critics saw it as confirmation that power dynamics were uneven and selectively enforced. The locker room tension turned palpable. Players started choosing words carefully, not just with the media but with each other. Trust frayed. Some felt Caitlin was being unfairly targeted. Others felt the attention she drew made everything heavier for everyone else. Practices grew quieter. Team dinners became shorter. The camaraderie that had always defined the league felt strained by something no one wanted to name out loud. Aya Wilson felt it too. Though she stayed publicly composed, the private toll began to surface in subtle ways. She was asked about Caitlin in interviews more than about her own performances. Every response she gave was parsed for tone, intention, subtext. Silence was interpreted as endorsement. Clarity was twisted into allegiance. It was exhausting and unfair. And Caitlin? She withdrew further. Her circle tightened. Media availability shrank. When she did speak, answers were surgical, short, controlled, emotionally neutral. The contrast between her on-court fire and off-court restraint fascinated fans and unsettled critics. She wasn't cracking. She was adapting. Ratings surged again. That was the cruel irony the league couldn't escape. Every moment of controversy translated into viewership. Every argument drove engagement. The exchange that had sparked regret now fueled growth metrics leadership couldn't ignore, and couldn't celebrate without looking hypocritical. Sponsors noticed the contradiction. Some leaned in, amplifying Caitlin's highlights with careful language about competition and resilience. Others hesitated, waiting for clarity that never arrived. Marketing teams debated risk versus reach in real time, unsure whether alignment would age well or haunt them later. The league attempted a soft reset. A new campaign emphasized unity, respect, and the full spectrum of competition. The visuals were polished, the message aspirational, but fans weren't buying it. The timing felt reactive. The tone felt evasive. And worst of all, it avoided the elephant in the room, the perception that Caitlin Clark had been handled differently. Then came the confrontation that wasn't televised. According to multiple sources, a closed-door meeting took place between league officials and player representatives. Emotions reportedly ran high. Not yelling, something sharper. Frustration wrapped in professionalism. Players demanded consistency. Officials defended process. Neither side left satisfied. What leaked afterward sent shockwaves. A single line, attributed to someone in the room, spread like wildfire. "This isn't about one moment, it's about who gets grace." That sentence became a rallying cry. Fans plastered it over clips, memes, threads, and debates. It reframed everything instantly. This wasn't Caitlin versus Aya. It wasn't rookie versus veteran. It was about who the system protected when things got uncomfortable. The backlash intensified. Media outlets that had initially downplayed the controversy pivoted. New segments analyzed past incidents with fresh eyes. Comparisons grew harsher. The league's prior decisions were dragged back into the spotlight, re-examined under a lens that refused to be gentle. Caitlin felt the shift. For the first time since the exchange, the narrative wasn't closing in on her. It was expanding outward. She wasn't the center anymore. She was the catalyst. That distinction mattered. It gave her something she hadn't had before: leverage. And that's when the most dangerous escalation occurred. A quiet report suggested Caitlin Clark had declined participation in an upcoming league promotional initiative. Not out of protest, not publicly, but through standard channels with professional reasoning. The decision alone wasn't extraordinary. The context made it explosive. Fans saw it as a statement. Critics saw it as escalation. The league saw it as a warning. Because declining didn't break rules. It didn't violate contracts. It didn't invite punishment. It simply demonstrated choice. And choice, when exercised by someone with Caitlin Clark's influence, rattles systems built on assumption. The reaction was swift but muted. Officially, nothing changed. Unofficially, conversations grew urgent. Executives questioned how far this could go. Players questioned what was possible. The balance of power felt less stable by the day. Aya Wilson, asked once more about the situation, finally drew a line. Her response was measured, thoughtful, and deeply revealing. She spoke about competition, about respect, about the weight of expectations, and about how narratives can trap people into roles they never chose. She didn't name Caitlin. She didn't blame the league. But the subtext was unmistakable. This situation was bigger than both of them, and neither wanted to be the symbol others were fighting over. That honesty shifted public sentiment again. Fans who had demanded sides began reconsidering. The story gained complexity, and complexity made the league's early, simplistic framing look even more misguided. The pressure reached a breaking point. Another insider's only rumor surfaced late one night, sending chills through every corner of the WNBA ecosystem. Caitlin Clark, it was said, was considering a direct address. Not an interview, not a press conference, but something controlled, deliberate, and impossible to interrupt. Not defensive. Definitive. The league didn't know when it would come. The players didn't know what it would say. The fans didn't know whether to brace or celebrate. But everyone understood the same thing. If Caitlin Clark spoke now, after everything that had escalated, after the missteps, the backlash, the exposed fractures, her words wouldn't just respond to controversy. They would redraw lines. And as the league waited, suspended between regret and resolve, one question hung heavier than all the rest. Was the WNBA prepared for what would happen if Caitlin Clark finally stopped adapting and decided to confront the system head-on? The fallout didn't arrive quietly. It crashed through the league like a siren that refused to shut off, echoing through arenas, front offices, locker rooms, and timelines all at once. What had started as a heated exchange now felt like a reckoning, and the WNBA could no longer pretend it was just noise from a loud internet cycle. The regret wasn't whispered anymore. It was visible. Fans didn't just argue, they organized. Hashtags exploded overnight, not in support of a team, but in defense of what they believed Caitlin Clark represented. Clips were slowed down, zoomed in, replayed with captions dripping in disbelief. "That's it," one viral post read. "That's what she got dragged for." The comments flooded in by the tens of thousands, accusing the league of rushing to judgment, of feeding a narrative that never fit the moment. Former players weighed in again, but this time with hesitation. Some walked back earlier takes, carefully reframing their words. Others doubled down and found themselves swallowed by backlash they hadn't anticipated. The tone shifted from confidence to caution. Everyone sensed it. The ground had moved, and standing in the same place suddenly felt dangerous. Inside arenas, the atmosphere changed. Every time Caitlin touched the ball, the reaction was louder, sharper, emotionally charged. Cheers weren't just cheers anymore. They sounded like defiance. Booing followed opposing players in ways that felt less about rivalry and more about unresolved anger. Security briefings reportedly expanded. Teams were told to expect heightened tension. This wasn't normal fandom. It was personal now. Caitlin felt it most in the quiet moments. Teammates noticed how conversations stopped when she entered rooms, not out of resentment, but discomfort. No one wanted to say the wrong thing. No one wanted to accidentally frame her as a victim or a villain. The isolation wasn't hostile. It was heavy. Support came in private texts, late-night check-ins, subtle nods in passing. Publicly, silence dominated. Privately, emotions spilled. Aya Wilson faced her own storm. Though many fans began defending her too, the pressure of being positioned as the other side took a toll. She was scrutinized for every glance, every quote, every possession. What she hadn't said became just as loud as what she had. Interviews turned into traps. Any attempt at nuance was twisted into alignment with one camp or another. She carried the weight of knowing the exchange had grown far beyond her control. League leadership found itself cornered. Statements that once felt sufficient now read hollow. Fans dissected phrasing line by line, accusing officials of hiding behind corporate language. Why had the response been so fast then and so slow now? Why was clarification suddenly complicated? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be manufactured. Sponsors grew nervous. Some paused campaigns. Others quietly shifted imagery, adjusting captions, avoiding names altogether. The league's commercial partners didn't want controversy. They wanted stability. Instead, they got a cultural flashpoint that refused to cool. Meetings were held behind closed doors about optics, risk exposure, long-term brand damage. The phrase instant regret surfaced more than once, according to insiders. Media coverage turned unforgiving. Segments once framed as debate transformed into investigations of tone and precedent. Analysts compared past exchanges that had been ignored or minimized. The inconsistency became the story. Headlines sharpened. The narrative flipped from heated exchange to why this one? And the league didn't like where that question led. Caitlin remained quiet. That silence did more than any statement ever could. Fans filled it with meaning, strength, restraint, quiet protest. Critics called it calculated. But the truth was simpler and heavier. She was exhausted. The emotional whiplash of being celebrated, criticized, defended, and weaponized all at once drained even her legendary focus. And yet, the numbers told a brutal truth. Ratings climbed again. Jerseys sold faster. Clips featuring her, even the controversial ones, dominated engagement charts. The league faced an uncomfortable paradox. The player they had appeared to chastise was driving unprecedented attention. Regret deepened, not just morally but strategically. Players began talking to each other differently. There was more honesty now, but also more fear. If this could happen to Caitlin Clark, who else could be caught in the crossfire of narrative and optics? The locker room tension wasn't explosive, it was brittle. Everyone walked carefully, aware that one moment, one look, one quote could spiral beyond intent. Then came the emotional breaking point. At a game weeks later, cameras caught Caitlin on the bench during a timeout, staring ahead as the crowd chanted her name. For a brief second, her composure cracked. Not tears, something quieter. A clenched jaw. A slow breath. The realization that this wasn't over, and might never be handled the way it should have been. That clip went viral within minutes. Fans called it proof of pressure. Critics called it drama. The league called it unfortunate optics. But to many watching, it felt like something else entirely. The human cost of a moment mishandled. And just when the league hoped the noise might finally fade, a new whisper began circulating behind the scenes, subtle but chilling. Multiple sources suggested internal discussions were underway about revisiting how future heated exchanges would be addressed. Not retroactively, but moving forward. On paper, it sounded like progress. In reality, it sounded like confirmation. Confirmation that the WNBA knew it had miscalculated. Confirmation that regret had arrived too late. And confirmation that whatever Caitlin Clark chose to do next would land in a league already off balance and bracing for impact. What the public didn't see was how fast the internal temperature rose once executives realized the backlash wasn't fading. It was hardening. Emails marked urgent stacked up. Emergency calls replaced routine meetings. The phrase that kept surfacing wasn't about optics anymore. It was about control, because the league had lost it. Sources whispered that a private review had been triggered, not officially announced, not publicly acknowledged. Not an investigation, something murkier. A reassessment of player management, narrative containment, and how future stars would be handled when they no longer fit neatly into the league's preferred storyline. Caitlin Clark's name appeared everywhere in those conversations, even when no one said it out loud. And that's when things got dangerous. Because Caitlin wasn't just watching anymore, she was listening. She noticed the shift in how requests came in. The sudden emphasis on media alignment. The quiet suggestions about tone, posture, restraint. It felt less like guidance and more like pressure. Not overt. Not explicit. Just enough to make the message unmistakable. Stay within the lines, or the lines will move around you. Aya Wilson sensed it too. In a rare off-camera moment, she reportedly confided to teammates that the league felt different now. Tighter, quieter, more political. The rivalry narrative that outsiders tried to force on her and Caitlin had become a convenient distraction from something bigger brewing above them both. Two stars, same system, different expectations. Then came the leak. A partial transcript from an internal call surfaced online late one night, shared anonymously, deleted within minutes. But not before screenshots spread like wildfire. It didn't mention Caitlin Clark by name. It didn't need to. Phrases like managing high-visibility personalities and fan-base volatility told the story. So did one line that froze everyone who read it. We can't afford another moment like that, not with her. The internet detonated. Fans weren't just angry anymore. They felt validated. Accusations of favoritism flipped into accusations of suppression. Commentators who had stayed neutral suddenly took sides. Former players called the language chilling. Legal analysts debated what it meant without ever saying the word everyone was thinking. Control. The league denied the transcript's authenticity within hours. Too fast. Too clean. That only made it worse. Every denial sparked 10 new theories. Every clarification widened the crack. The narrative had slipped out of their hands completely. Caitlyn's camp stayed silent until they didn't. A single quote appeared from an unnamed source close to her. Just one sentence. No emotion. No accusation. She's taking notes. That was it. No follow-up. No explanation. And somehow, it hit harder than any rant ever could. Fans read it as resolve. Executives read it as a warning. Players read it as confirmation that Caitlin Clark wasn't just enduring the pressure. She was processing it. Rumors escalated immediately. Was she reconsidering long-term commitments? Was she rethinking how much of herself she owed the league? Was she quietly evaluating options no one wanted to say out loud? International play. Media leverage. Power moves that didn't exist for WNBA stars a generation ago, but did now. Ticket sales surged again. Ratings spiked. The contradiction became unbearable. The league was benefiting from the very player it had seemingly tried to minimize, and everyone knew it. That imbalance created paranoia. Every move Caitlyn made was analyzed for subtext. Every smile, every silence, every on-court reaction felt loaded. Then came the moment that changed the internal mood completely. During a nationally televised game, cameras caught a brief exchange between Caitlyn and a league official courtside. No audio, just body language. A nod, a pause, a look that lingered half a second too long. Caitlyn turned away expressionless. Social media exploded within minutes. What was that? That didn't look friendly. Why is an official even talking to her mid-game? The league said it was nothing. Routine. Fans didn't buy it. Neither did players. Because by now, nothing felt routine anymore. Late that week, another quiet development rippled through insider circles. An emergency agenda item was added to an upcoming owners' meeting. Not publicly listed. Not officially explained. Just a placeholder that read, "Future Star Relations." That phrase landed like a threat. Was the league preparing to reset its approach, or tighten its grip? Was Caitlin Clark about to become the face of a new era, or the cautionary tale of crossing invisible lines? No one knew, but everyone felt it, because the regret wasn't just about one exchange anymore. It was about what the league had revealed about itself when the pressure hit, and how much power it was willing to exert to protect its image. And as Caitlin Clark stepped back onto the court that night, the crowd roaring louder than ever, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever happens next won't just define her career. It will expose exactly how much the WNBA can tolerate a star it can't control, and whether the league is about to make the biggest mistake of its modern era. Within hours, the league's attempt to steady the narrative collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Fans who had once argued about X's and O's were now dissecting press releases word by word, tone by tone. Every statement felt curated. Every omission felt intentional. And every attempt at neutrality was interpreted as choosing a side. Social media turned into a war zone. Hashtags split cleanly down the middle, not just pro, Caitlyn or pro league, but pro, player versus pro power. Clips from games were reposted with slowed-down frames and captions dripping with accusation. Old interviews resurfaced, recontextualized. Innocent comments from years ago were suddenly treated as evidence of long-simmering bias. The speed was relentless. The outrage fed itself. Caitlin Clark's mentions became unmanageable. Support poured in raw, protective, furious. Fans talked about feeling dismissed, talked about seeing themselves in how she was handled, talked about being tired of being told to quiet down when they were the reason the noise existed in the first place. Jerseys sold out again. Not celebration sales, protest sales. But the backlash didn't stop there. Veteran players felt the tremor too. Some stayed silent, knowing any word would be weaponized. Others spoke carefully, threading statements that tried to defend the league while acknowledging the discomfort. A few went further, hinting that this wasn't new, just newly visible. That the pressure to fall in line had always existed, only now it had a face fans could rally behind. Aya Wilson, measured as ever, became an unwilling focal point again. Anything she said, or didn't, was amplified. Supporters praised her composure. Critics accused her of benefiting from imbalance. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't subtle. The rivalry the league never wanted to admit it fueled was now being dragged into daylight, louder and uglier than before. Inside locker rooms, conversations shifted from basketball to survival. In post-game moments, Caitlin began lingering longer with her teammates, with rookies, with players who'd been quiet through the storm. Conversations happened away from microphones. Looks were exchanged that suggested alignment, not isolation. It wasn't rebellion. It was coalition. The league had always feared collective leverage. Stars were manageable. Movements were not. And suddenly, the possibility of players unifying around shared grievances felt less hypothetical and more imminent. As the season pushed forward, one final development surfaced, small, almost invisible to casual fans. A new clause quietly appeared in upcoming contract discussions. Language about representation, about public framing, about dispute processes. Nothing explosive, nothing obvious, but enough to signal that something had shifted behind the curtain. The question now wasn't whether the league had misjudged Caitlin Clark. The question was whether it had underestimated what happens when a player refuses to be either silent or sensational, and instead chooses to be deliberate. Because the next move wouldn't come with a press conference. It would come with a decision. And when that decision drops, it won't just redefine Caitlin Clark's future. It will force the league to confront whether it's truly ready for the power it's been profiting from all along. Because what's unfolding right now in the WNBA isn't just about Caitlin Clark, Aya Wilson, or one heated exchange that spiraled out of control. It's about power, visibility, accountability, and who gets to define the narrative when the league is growing faster than its culture can keep up. Every reaction you've had, the frustration, the excitement, the disbelief, that's not accidental. That's the tension of a league standing at a crossroads. If you've ever felt like the conversation around women's basketball gets redirected, minimized, or flattened the moment it becomes uncomfortable, this is exactly why this moment matters. If you've ever believed players deserve not just exposure but respect, not just marketing but protection, then you already understand what's at stake here. Silence won't shape what comes next. Engagement will. This is bigger than one star, bigger than one rivalry, bigger than one press release designed to calm things down without actually fixing anything. The future of the league will be decided by what fans reward, what they question, and what they refuse to let fade quietly into the next news cycle. So don't just scroll past this. Talk about it. Debate it. Challenge lazy takes. Support the players who are brave enough to exist in the spotlight without shrinking themselves to make institutions comfortable. Demand transparency when narratives feel curated. Demand consistency when accountability feels selective. And most importantly, keep watching, not just the games, but the decisions happening behind them. Because the next chapter hasn't been written yet. And whether this moment becomes a turning point or another missed opportunity depends on how loud, how informed, and how persistent the audience chooses to be. The league is listening now, maybe more closely than it ever has. The question is, are you? If you've watched the WNBA grow and felt proud, but also uneasy, this is exactly the moment your voice matters. Not tomorrow, not after another press release. Now, because history shows one thing clearly. Leagues don't change when players speak alone. They change when fans refuse to look away. If Caitlin Clark's situation made you angry, confused, energized, or even conflicted, that reaction is valid. It means you're paying attention. It means you understand this isn't just basketball. It's about fairness, power, respect, and who gets protected when pressure hits. And those things only shift when the audience refuses to be passive. So engage. Comment. Share. Push back against shallow narratives that reduce complex issues into lazy rivalries. Support players who take risks by speaking carefully but honestly. Demand better coverage. Demand consistency. Demand accountability without tearing athletes down just to feed outrage. Most importantly, stay locked in. Watch how the league responds next. Not what it says, but what it does. Watch whose voices get amplified and whose get ignored. Watch which conversations get encouraged and which quietly disappear. Growth without integrity collapses under its own weight. And this league is at a moment where integrity matters more than optics. If you care about women's basketball, truly care, don't let this become another cycle of noise followed by silence. Hold space for disagreement without turning it into division. Celebrate competition without manufacturing enemies. Protect the players without excusing systems that fail them. And if you want more real conversations like this, not sanitized takes, not PR scripts, make that clear. Like, subscribe. Stay engaged. Because attention is power, and right now, the league is paying attention. This story isn't over. The next move hasn't happened yet. And when it does, you'll want to be here, not just watching history unfold, but helping shape what comes next.